So let's dive into a conversation that's been going on for, about 2,000 years inside the Catholic Church. It's this incredible story about men, women, and how they relate not just to each other, but to God.
And really, this entire massive story kind of boils down to one central question. In God's eyes, is the relationship between men and women supposed to be a partnership of equals? Or is it meant to be a hierarchy, a system of command? This one question has been the source of so much tension and debate for 2 millennia. Now, to even begin to get at an answer, we have to start with this big-sounding concept, theological anthropology. But don't worry, it's really just a fancy way of asking the most basic human questions, right? Who are we? Why are we here? What's our purpose? If we can get a handle on that, it's the key to unlocking this whole discussion.
Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. Let's try to understand what the theology says was the original blueprint for humanity, before all the complications of history and culture got in the way. Well, according to the Church's official teaching, the Catechism, the starting point is crystal clear. Man and woman were created in perfect equality, period. Their differences as male and female aren't some accident. They're seen as a good thing, something willed by God to reflect the divine. And here's the crucial part. They were made for each other, designed to be in this deep relationship, this communion of persons. And this quote just nails that idea perfectly. Think about the Genesis story. When man first sees woman, his reaction is all about recognition, another eye. I mean, that is not the language of a boss looking at an employee. That's the language of a true partner recognizing an equal. So if that original plan was so clear, if it was all about perfect equality, what on earth happened? Well, this is where the story takes a really sharp turn, where that ideal comes crashing into the messy reality of human history.
In the theological story, the very first thing to go wrong, the first distortion, comes from sin. And all of a sudden, that beautiful relationship of mutual love is twisted into one of conflict and domination. This verse from Genesis, it's seen not as God's command for how things should be, but as a tragic description of what happens when we turn away from that original plan.
Now, what's so fascinating is that you can see this tension playing out right inside the New Testament itself. Just look at the writings of St. Paul. On one hand, you get a passage from Ephesians like this, which, let's be honest, has been used for centuries to justify a hierarchy. But then, from the very same author, you get this absolutely radical declaration in Galatians of total equality in Christ. It's a theological puzzle that Christians have been wrestling with ever since. And for centuries, that debate was heavily influenced by the science and philosophy of the day. I mean, look at this. This is a genuinely shocking line from Thomas Aquinas, one of the Church's greatest thinkers. He was just drawing on the biology he knew from the ancient Greeks, which was totally wrong, and believed a female was basically a defective male. It just goes to show how deeply cultural ideas can seep into even the most brilliant theological mind. And over time, these ideas just got baked into the culture. Practical roles that people had were mistaken for permanent natural states. Philosophical ideas started linking men with reason and women with emotion, which naturally suggests a hierarchy. And of course, simple physical strength was often the tool used to enforce these patterns, pushing that original ideal further and further out of sight. But you know what? That's not where the story ends, not by a long shot. The 20th century saw this major pivot, a really conscious effort within the Church to look back at this history and try to reclaim that original vision of equality. The big turning point was something called the Second Vatican Council, or Vatican II. It was this massive global meeting of bishops in the 1960s that famously decided to open the windows of the Church. It forced a huge reevaluation of its relationship with the modern world, and that included, you guessed it, the role of women. And wow, the language that came out of that council was just dramatically different. For the first time, you have an official church document talking about women claiming equity in fact. It speaks about marriage not as a hierarchy, but as a communion of minds. And then you have Pope Paul VI himself using the word liberated, a clear nod to the long, difficult road that had been traveled. So you might be asking, why does any of this theological talk actually matter in the real world? Well, because these ideas have very real consequences. Just look at these staggering numbers to see the gap between that ideal and our reality. One study found that women do 2/3 of all the world's work. And yet, for all that work, they receive only 1/10 of the world's salary. Think about that. That highlights a massive systemic problem. And this one might be the most startling of all.
They own just 1/100th of the world's land. These figures show exactly why this theological conversation about dignity and equality isn't just an academic exercise. It has urgent, profound consequences for billions of people.
So, when you're facing this long, complicated history and these stark modern realities, where do you look for the true model? Well, for modern theologians, the answer is simple. You have to go back to the source of Christianity itself. You look to the example of Jesus. And when you actually look at the Gospels, his behavior for his time was absolutely radical. He openly welcomed women into his inner circle of disciples. That was just unheard of. He taught complex theology directly to them, treating them as complete intellectual equals. He blew past social and religious taboos to talk to and heal them. And maybe most important of all, he chose women to be the very first people to witness the single most important event in Christianity, the resurrection. So here's the real takeaway from all that. From a theological perspective, Jesus' actions aren't just random acts of kindness. They're seen as a deliberate, powerful restoration of God's original plan. He's cutting through all that cultural noise to bring back that core ideal of dignity, respect, and fundamental equality. And that brings us right back to the ultimate takeaway from this whole 2,000-year journey. The goal of modern theology is to finally restore that original vision. It's not hierarchy, it's communion. It's not domination, it's partnership. Of course, the huge question that's still on the table is how fully this ideal is actually being lived out, both inside and outside the church today. Thanks for joining me on this one.